Over the past two seasons, the Raiders have seemingly become allergic to success after reaching 6 wins on the season. For a team that was around 2 to 3 games above 500 throughout the first 10 weeks, you'd expect them to at least finish at 9 and 7 or 10 and 6 on the season. The Raiders are not that kind of team, as we are now witnessing another year where they simply couldn't get the job done. In the NFL, you want to be able to control your own destiny, whether you make it to the postseason only depending on your team winning. We've seen it plenty of times before, the classic Week 17 win-and-in matchup that is the difference between going home and January football. The Raiders are the antithesis of this, as over the past 2 years, the Raiders' second half of the season collapses have left them needing help to just make it to the playoffs. For a team that very much controlled their own destinies, the Raiders have had it slip through their fingers worse than any wide receiver that currently plays for the Eagles. After reaching the 6-win mark on the season over the past 2 years, the Raiders have a resounding 2-9 combined record in the games that followed. So, let's go back through these past 2 years and go week by week as it all fell apart for the Raiders. Entering 2019, Jon Gruden needed to show some sort of progress after finishing the previous season with a pitiful 4-12 record. Gruden now had his guy calling the shots up in the front office in Mike Mayock, and Gruden would have his hand-picked guys that would go out and perform for him. The Raiders would at least start off the 2019 season on a high note with a Week 1 win against Denver, an improvement from losing in Week 1 the previous season and the second half collapse to the Rams. The Raiders would lose their next 2 games to the Chiefs and Vikings respectively. They weren't exactly close games, but one of those teams was the eventual Super Bowl champion and the other a playoff team. So, silver linings and stuff like that. With 2 consecutive, albeit close wins against the Colts and Bears, the Raiders were back at above 500 at 3-2. Wouldn't last long as the Raiders would drop the next 2 to the Packers in a blowout and lose a close game they arguably should have won against the Texans, dropping them to 3-4. What followed was their best stretch of the season, a 3-game win streak against the Lions, Chargers, and Bengals, putting them at 6-4 on the season and where the collapse is set to begin. At 6-4, the Raiders were just barely on the outside looking in, losing the tiebreaker for the then 6th seed to the Texans as a result of their head-to-head matchup. Then the Raiders got absolutely thrashed by the Jets, to the point that it wasn't even close. This definitely won't happen again anytime soon. It's a tough loss to swallow, but they've just got to move on to the next one and, oh right, they play Kansas City next. And as expected, they once again got their stuff kicked in 6 ways to Sunday by the Chiefs. The Raiders desperately needed a win against the 7-5 Titans to keep their playoff hopes alive. They would suffer their 3rd blowout loss in a row and fall back under 500. Never again that season would they reach 500. Any and all playoff hopes would effectively be vanquished after the Jags would deal the Raiders their 4th consecutive loss to drop them to 6-8. The 2 wildcards at that point were already at 8 wins. The Raiders would need to win out and some miracles to work out in their favor for them to even have the slightest chance. They'd get a Week 16 win against the Chargers to keep them in the race for another week, but with the Titans win in Week 17, the Raiders were officially eliminated before their game was even finished. In an attempt to be ballsy and win the game right then and there on the final play, the Raiders' 2-point try failed and the Raiders would finish the season on a loss. Final record, 7-9. After starting 6-4, the Raiders dropped 5 of their last 6 games and wouldn't even finish at 500 on the season. The 2019 Raiders showed that they weren't ready to take on the elite teams of the league, with most of their blowout losses on the season at the hands of playoff teams that year, with the exception of the Jets. Say they flip their 1-possession losses to Houston, Jacksonville, and Denver and win those games, they would have been 10-6. If they don't lay an egg against the Jets, that's 11-5. They could have been a much better than a 7-9 team. But at the very least it was a step in the right direction even if the season didn't end the way they wanted to. 2020 was supposed to be the year the Raiders were to take that step forward that they just couldn't get to in 2019. They managed to squeak out a win against the Panthers on opening day and once again started out the season on the right foot. They even managed to pull off an upset against the New Orleans Saints in Week 2, beating a playoff team from last season. For a team that had been previously blown out of the waters when facing an elite team, the Raiders had their first major victory in a while. The Raiders would follow up such momentum by losing 2 straight games to the Patriots and Bills. At the half against the Patriots and Bills, the Raiders were only down by no more than 4 points, and would lose both games by giving up multiple touchdowns in the fourth quarter. And it's not like things were about to get any easier either. They had to go into Arrowhead next week and play the Chiefs. It was a game that the Raiders needed to win if they wanted to prove that they could keep up with the true elites of the AFC after their previous 2 games. And yet they actually won that game. The Raiders went into Arrowhead and beat the Chiefs in their own stadium, and so far giving them their only loss on the season. No longer were the Raiders simply laying down and taking the blowout losses to elite teams. They were sometimes beating them. Much like after the win against New Orleans, however, this momentum wouldn't last as they got shellacked by the Bucs the following week. Through the first 6 weeks, the Raiders seemingly had the potential and proved they could beat good teams. But they'd also have games just slip through their hands and so once again sat at 500. Then the Raiders went on a nice 3-game win streak against the Browns, Chargers, and Broncos to get to 6-3. Oh crap, they've hit 6 wins. Here is where the true catastrophe begins. The Raiders were oh so close to beating the Chiefs again and sweeping the season series with them if it wasn't for a last-minute Mahomes comeback drive. The only way they could have possibly followed up such a performance was to not even bother to show up against the Falcons the following week and get crushed by a team that they shouldn't have even lost to. The next week they made the New York Jets of all teams look like a competent team and were very much on their way to losing to them if Greg Williams doesn't call a cover 0 blitz on the final play. And in a game where they needed to win to keep their playoff hopes alive against the Colts, stop me if this sounds too familiar, they couldn't even keep it close. With how stacked the AFC playoff picture is this year, the Raiders had lost control of their own destiny, and now needed help for them to make it to the playoffs. That's without even mentioning losing to the Chargers on Monday Night Football, that essentially put the final nail in the coffin for their playoff aspirations. With only Miami and Denver left on the schedule, they most likely finished the season 8-8, a 1-game improvement from last season. It was the same damn script 2 seasons in a row. The Raiders would hit 6 wins, they'd get crushed by some bad team they should have blown out of the water, and they would lose the race for the final wild card by failing to beat the teams that they needed to beat. The Raiders over the past 2 seasons probably should have been better than their record would tell you, but their second halves of the season would have you believe they weren't even mediocre. Jon Gruden had everything he wanted given to him with the Raiders, and his best record might just be going 8-8. At some point you have to shift the blame towards coaching, and for the Raiders to have back-to-back seasons end in collapse is not a good sign. The defensive coordinator was fired as a result, but is that truly enough to prevent another collapse? Or will Gruden's Grinders do the same thing for the 3rd time in a row next year? Year 4 under Gruden will have to be playoffs or bust for the Raiders, as there is no reason they can't figure out a way to sneak in even as the 7th seed. But even if they are a playoff team next year, I'd still be a little cautious once they hit 6 wins again.